Last summer, we made a video talking about the 10 worst contracts in the NHL, but today a lot has changed, and now we're gonna go through the 15 worst in the NHL today, presented by BetUs. Now, like I said, a lot has changed since last August, and today I want to make a new ranking going over every single team, going for the worst contracts in the league because there are some doozies. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the worst contracts in the league to see just how bad they get. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the offseason. Now, we start out today at the 15th spot in the 15th worst contract in the league. And just to preface this, these are not bad players, at least on the surface level. They're just contracts that I think are pretty detrimental to their team and makes it a lot harder for their teams to actually make moves to win. And the great example of that comes in at number 15 with Ondrej Palat of the New Jersey Devils. He's still a very solid player, and at 33 years old is chugging along quite well. This last year getting 31 points, 11 goals in 71 games. But the problem, of course, is that contract. That $6 million AAV is pretty rough, but you have another 3 years on top of it and a full no move clause. That means for New Jersey to get rid of Palat's contract, it is going to be a headache and a half, and I'm sure they've tried. You have right now the contract negotiations with Dawson Mercer, and I think if Palat's deal wasn't there, they might have been able to have the AAV to get him signed long term. Thankfully for New Jersey, even in the Jacob Markstrom deals and some of the other free agency signings they made, they've been able to work with it, but I still think Palat's deal, especially now with him aging and still with the term he has left, that AAV is pretty brutal. Next we move on to the 14th worst contract in the league, and this is actually one that was signed in this last NHL free agency. We go now on to Elias Lindholm and the Boston Bruins, his contract being $7.75 million for the next 7 years. Now, here's the thing. If Lindholm is back to prime Lindholm and he's able to put up those extreme numbers, then I don't think this contract is bad. It's probably around the fine average, I would say. But I think in Lindholm's case, there's a lot of concerns over the health, over the consistency, and that's been an issue ever really since Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk left Calgary. You can see since that 82-point, 42-goal campaign in 2022, he's been kind of falling off a cliff. And this last year in Vancouver and Calgary, he just wasn't really able to find much consistency. That could change as he's now surrounded with David Pastrnak and also Brad Marchand, and maybe Pastrnak is able to lift his numbers. But I feel like in Lindholm's case, there's so many different intangibles and injuries and inconsistencies that at this point right now, I think it's a big overpay. But I do hope that changes. From all I can tell, Lindholm was a pretty good dude, and I hope Boston is finally the future secure home that he needs. Now we go on to another original 6 team and another pretty bad contract here. Next to my number 13, we're going to go on to the Chicago Blackhawks, and I got Seth Jones. Now, for a lot of you guys, he might be a lot higher on this list, maybe even top 5, but let me explain why he's more in the 13 range for me. Yeah, his contract at $9.5 million is an albatross, and also considering the years that he still has left on his deal with 6 more years left, it's not a good contract by any means. But I do think that Seth Jones is a little bit overboard, and that's coming from somebody that has been the biggest fan of Seth Jones for a while. But I thought this last year was actually pretty solid for him all around. He took some steps defensively, got a little bit more consistent, got a little bit more engaged physically, and I think that was a good sign for him going forward. I don't think, again, that contract is ever going to be good or ever going to be fine, but I think as Chicago gets better, Seth Jones also will. And I also think at this point, with what Chicago's placement is, they might be overpaying Seth Jones a couple $1 million, but it doesn't really matter. Heck, Chicago's in a position where they're trying to trade and sign overpaid players to get to the cap floor. It'll be okay if Seth Jones is paid a couple $1 million more. Next up, we're going to go into an AAV and a contract that I think is a lot more hurtful for his team. Next up, I got Tyler Seguin of the Dallas Stars. Of course, my favorite team, but I got to be honest still. Seguin, of course, is a massive overpayment for what he is at this stage in his career. Injuries have been a major cause of this pretty much right after he was signed to this massive extension. That really started to creep up to him. But at 32 years old, he's fine. And at $9.8 million, it's not a huge churn still at 3 years, but for the Stars and how many younger players they have that are much, much better than Seguin, it has been a problem. But this last year, 52 points in 68 games, and it was pretty great in the playoffs. I think that is honestly the big thing going for him right now that keeps him outside the top 10 for me. It is a pretty big overpayment that has, I think, hurt some of their contract negotiations, but I don't think it's hurt the team too much. You see how successful they've still been, and thank goodness for that. Now we're going to move on to another big contract from this last offseason, going on to number 11, the 11th worst contract in the league, just outside the top 10. I got Chandler Stephenson now of the Seattle Kraken. Now, as we talked about in the RFAs video, I think Seattle is in a weird position right now where they can't really sign Matty Beniers all too easily. And in Stephenson's case, I think he's somebody that really is hurting that bottom line, honestly. You see what he was signed to, $6.25 million, and for a 7-year deal. It's honestly insane to me that Stephenson was able to get it. His agent is incredible. I would say for now, it's not horrible. I mean, these last couple of years, he's put up around 50, 60 points or so. So paying him that much isn't horrible for the now. But I think even because you aren't able to sign Matty Beniers right now, because the long-term effects that contract might have, I think it's a pretty big loss. But I think for Seattle, this will be a really interesting one. He'll be like 37 when this contract expires. And I think towards those latter years, it could get quite ugly. Now, before we get to the top 10, I first want to talk about today's sponsor in BetUs. If you don't know them already, BetUs is the best place to start with the NHL picks starting this next season. They have so many different options, and even they have options for different players over and under totals. They have these Stanley Cup odds as well, where you can go through any single team if you're feeling them for the Cup this next year and betting on them. You can also go for the divisional odds for the Atlantic, Metro, Central, Pacific. A lot of good options there, as well as the NHL awards options, which are really interesting. For every single major NHL award, BetUS has options and picks for all the top players in the league. So if you're looking for a place to bet, if you're looking for a new sports book, BetUS is the place to be, especially with the 125% sign-up bonus with your first three deposits up to $2,000. You got amazing customer service, amazing payouts. BetUS is the place to be. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Next up, we start out inside the top 10, and this has always been a contract that's floated around this range for me. But next up, I got from the New York Rangers, Jacob Trouba. Now, the only reason this isn't higher is because of the term. He only has 2 more years left at $8.5 million, but it's about everything else. It's about the no move clause that Trouba, of course, has had the right to negotiate and earn and use, but that's kept him from getting traded to Detroit, to other places that might have wanted his services. But pretty much everything about this has been just rough for the Rangers. I would say maybe 2023 was an okay season for him all around, but this last year, I think he kind of went back to his old ways and just had some poor moments throughout the season. He's somebody that I think the Rangers wanted to trade, have wanted to trade for a while, but because of all the things in his contract, it's made it almost impossible. And for that, it has to be here. You can honestly make the case that it could be top 5, and I would not disagree with you, but I think, again, because of that lack of huge term compared to some of the other contracts on this list, it kind of puts it a little bit lower. Next up, going on to number 9, we're going to go on to a contract that's pretty sad to watch, honestly. Next up, we go on to Phillip Grubauer with the Seattle Kraken. And it used to be even worse with the term there a couple years ago. Now he has a $5.9 million deal for the next 3 seasons, which isn't as bad, but still, considering what Grubauer has been for Seattle, it's been a pretty big bust. He, of course, was their big goaltending pick in the expansion draft from Colorado. But since then, his best season has been an .899 save percentage with a 14-16-2 record. It's just not good enough. He was okay during the playoffs in 2023, but that was his best moment. And I feel like in Grubauer's case, he's someone that's continually been disappointing for the Seattle team. In the case where other players like Joey Daccord have had to come in and save that goaltending tandem, Grubauer, just for how much he's been being paid, for the inconsistencies he's had, to me, he also has to be here. And another contract just like Chandler Stephenson's that's keeping the Matty Beniers talks at a stalemate. Now we go on to number 8, and the 8th worst contract in the league. This is also another one that I could see people having higher, but I think because of how well he did in the second half and just because of how rebuilding Calgary is now, it's not as detrimental. Next up, I got Jonathan Huberdeau, of course, of the Calgary Flames. I think on paper, you can make the case that this is the worst contract in the league, $10.5 million, 7 years left on his deal, and I think I would agree with that, but I also feel like the situation that Calgary is in, it kind of makes it a little bit less relevant. You consider what he's been able to do, and in the second half, I thought he was pretty decent with Calgary this last year. He ended up finishing with 52 points, 40 assists in 81 games, but again, I think because of the rebuilding mode that Calgary's in, it's not really hurting them too much at this stage. You could make the argument that because of Huberdeau, they've had to kind of enter this rebuilding mode because him being one of their stars is really an indictment on their franchise, which You're not wrong. But I think until Calgary's contending, I don't think this contract is going to be as important. But once they are starting to contend, this one will be rough, especially with him in his mid-30s. I mean, I don't think he's going to get much better than this. Now going on to number 7 and a continually bad contract in this league, we go on to Torrey Krug of the St. Louis Blues. In terms of term, it's not as bad right now. He has 3 years left on his deal at $6.5 million. But considering the player that Krug is and what he's blocked in his tenure with St. Louis, considering the betrayal that he potentially had with Philadelphia, that contract has been a nuisance for the Blues in a lot of ways. I mean, he's been okay offensively, but he's also had some injury troubles and will also be out indefinitely with an ankle injury as well. And that's just something that is another big blow for this contract. To me, even though the term isn't horrible, the AAV and what he's blocked and what he's prevented St. Louis from being is just rough. And also considering him being the choice over Alex Pietrangelo, it's just more salt in the wound. Next up, we go just outside the top 5 with the 6th worst contract in the league. Next up, I got Johnny Gaudreau of the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think there are ways in which it's better and worse than a Jonathan Huberdeau contract, for example. I think the big reason why it's worse is I think Columbus is trying to improve. They're trying to get better. They're trying to contend. But I think considering the cap hits they have in Gaudreau, and even in Laine's case a little bit too, I think it's kept them back from getting more free agents, going after bigger players and kind of cap strap them a little bit. But I think in Gaudreau's case, he has been the better player than Huberdeau, but really not by too much. His career in Columbus has kind of been irrelevant, kind of been substandard, and the lack of any defensive play whatsoever has made it a big topic of discussion. I really do hope that after this, he's off the list forever and he really starts to pop off, but with how he's done in Columbus, with how he's regressed, there might be a chance he never gets back to that level we saw with the Flames. Now we're entering the holy grail of worst contracts, the top 5 worst in the NHL, and advancing on to the 5th spot here, I got Andrew Copp of the Detroit Red Wings. Now, there's a couple other contracts you could also have in here, Justin Holl, Ben Sherratt, but to me, Andrew Copp is by far the worst for everything he's represented. And Steve Yzerman has gone after a lot of free agents, but to me, Copp has been the most overpaid. At $5.625 million, he's someone with 3 more years left on his contract as well, which isn't doing him any favors. But considering how he's regressed into time with Detroit, he didn't even get 10 goals in his first year with the Red Wings, and then this last year, 33 points. I think it was telling that in the very next offseason, the Red Wings went after JT Compher, and now he's their for-sure second-line center. But it's just been sad to see the decline in speed and intensity in Cobb's game, and considering players like Raymond, like Seider, like Berggren are all still unsigned, it's just rough to see the Cobb contract be this rough already. Now we move on to number 4 in another Atlantic Division team here. Next up, we go to the Montreal Canadiens and Brendan Gallagher. And I have been a huge fan of Gallagher throughout his entire NHL career, but these last couple of years have been a rough watch for sure. He's somebody that has declined, but I would say this year was pretty decent, was pretty okay. 16 goals, 31 points, and that's a reason why he's not inside the top 3, but still considering his contract, $6.5 million, 3 years left on that deal. Montreal has seemingly always been a team, even in this rebuild, that's right up there with the cap, and contracts like Gallagher, Josh Anderson have been a big reason for that. And in Gallagher's case was one of the many mistakes in the late tenure of Marc Bergevin. I still can't believe those last couple off seasons, man. They were crazy. Now we're not done yet with the Columbus contracts, and coming in at number 3, we're gonna go with Elvis Merzlikins in the goaltending side of things at $5.4 million, 3 years left on his deal. To me, the Merzlikins contract has been an absolute bust, and it's really kept him from being dealt. There was trade rumors around him potentially going to teams like Edmonton, but with that cap hit, it was just impossible to see a fit there. And he's just been somebody that over the past few years has just gotten worse and worse with Columbus. This last year, an .897 save percentage. There was a decent stretch here and there, but considering what Columbus needed Merzlikins to be in this rough spot in the franchise history, he just has not been able to come up big. I hope he does. He's a fan favorite of mine. He's always electric, but man, it's been a very weird watch over these past couple of years to see him kind of be going through these inconsistencies, these weird stretches, but the cap hit is just unjustifiable for what his performance has been. Next, if we go on to number 2 and one of the highest profile worst contracts in the league, we have to go on to Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, I'm still baffled by the fact that the Kings were able to get rid of this contract without even retaining a cent of salary, but it had to take Darcy Kuemper being brought back for it to even happen in the first place, and I think the Capitals are trying to bet as optimistically as they can be, but at $8.5 million, he has just been a disaster so far. With LA in his first year, I mean, we talked about him so much. You know why Pierre-Luc Dubois has been bad, but the poor work ethic, the inconsistencies, the weirdness in his play all throughout the lineup. He was going on the fourth line, first line. They were trying him everywhere they possibly could, and nothing seemed to work. I hope it does get better in Washington, but as of right now, there's nowhere else it could have been. But now going on to number one, speaking of nowhere else it could have been, we're going on to, in my opinion, the most detrimental contract in the league. We talk about how these contracts might hurt their teams in acquiring players and giving other players the best deals possible. Well, this one is already been hurting since day one and will continue to hurt the Edmonton Oilers. Next up, I have to have Darnell Nurse. Great things have happened around Darnell Nurse. The Stanley Cup final run for the Oilers was fantastic, but it's getting an A+ after doing nothing on the group project. If anything, Darnell Nurse was actively hurting the Oilers as much as possible, and it's insane that they got to Game 7 of the Cup final even with his performance. At $9.25 million for the next 6 seasons, Nurse is by far, to me, the most detrimental contract, and overpaid by at least $3, maybe even $4 million for the Oilers is objectively a nightmare. You consider what he's been over the past few seasons, a good power play quarterback, good goal scorer, but besides that, he really hasn't been coming as advertised. He's paid to be one of the best defensemen, top 5, top 10 in the league, and he's been one of the worst. And to me, I don't think there are many contracts out there that are more of an overpay, but I definitely don't think there's any contract out there that is hurting his team as much as Darnell Nurse's is, and I hope it turns around because the Oilers desperately need him to. They've been so lucky that Evan Bouchard has been so good, that Mattias Ekholm has been a beast, because without those two, I mean, I don't even know where they'd be right now. But those are my worst contracts in the NHL today. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys agree, what you guys disagree with, and what your worst contracts in the NHL would be. Of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you guys haven't already. And check out BetUs in the description down below to make your own NHL picks daily. And of course, make sure you click on this card for all of my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. Goodbye.